The Loud House has been such a hit that in the short time that it's been on the air, we have already done a cartoon conspiracy about whether or not Lincoln Loud is adopted, but don't worry, you can check that out right after this one. Hey everyone, I'm Justin with ChannelFrederator, and today we're going to look into one particular episode, Butterfly Effect, and try to figure out if this episode exists as a delusion in Lincoln's head, or if it's the start of something darker for the Loud family. So get ready as we try to answer, could the Loud House possibly involve the butterfly effect? Let's get started. But before we do, I'm going to need to explain to you some basic chaos theory. Don't you just love when you click on a video you think's gonna be about fun and cartoons and all this cool stuff, but we tricked you and we got you learning about advanced level mathematics? So, chaos theory is a branch of mathematics focused on the behavior of dynamic systems that are highly sensitive to initial conditions. The chaos part is a bit of a misnomer. It doesn't really have much to do with actual chaos. It's more chaotic in the sense that small changes can sometimes lead to big changes and outcomes. The most well-known chaos theory is known as the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect describes how a small change in one state of a system can result in large differences in a later state. But why is it called the butterfly effect? Well, allow me to explain. The name, coined by mathematician and meteorologist Edward Lorenz, is derived from the metaphorical example of the details of a tornado, the time of formation, path taken, etc., 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 being influenced by minor factors such as the flapping of the wings of a distant butterfly several weeks earlier. So, for example, a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil could result in a slight change in air pressure that would carry over across the atmosphere and could cause a tornado 2 weeks later in Texas.
Boom. Butterfly effect.
Sounds crazy? Well, I know, but Lorenz discovered the effect when he observed runs of his weather model. He found that when the initial condition data was rounded, he would have massively different results than when the initial condition data was unrounded. Plus, when you plot out the equation, it honestly kind of looks like a butterfly. Alright, so now that we've gotten everyone's favorite subject, math, out of the way, let's talk about the episode. I promise it'll make sense very, very soon, don't worry. So, after a yo-yo trick that he was showing off goes wrong, Lincoln discovers that it smashed and spilled Lisa's chemicals. Afraid of Lisa's reaction, Lincoln doesn't tell her, which sets off a chain reaction of events that unravels the entire Loud household. In this case, Lincoln is our butterfly, and the rest of the Loud family gets caught up in one crazy tornado. Get ready for this, this is insane. Lori and Bobby break up, Lenny becomes super smart, Lynn gets kicked off of her sports teams, Lisa starts working at a gas station, Lola gets hit in the face and decides to quit pageants and run away. Luna gets recruited to join Mick Swagger but gets kicked off of his tour. Lana becomes a nervous wreck and starts living in a bubble. Luann gives up comedy and becomes a political activist. Lucy is bitten by a bat and becomes a vampire because why not? And chemicals get spilled on Lily, turning her into a massive radioactive baby. So yeah, things have been better. But luckily for us, this episode exists outside the real Loud House storyline. It's all just a worst case scenario that Lincoln is running through in his head, like Lorenz's weather models, right? Hopefully. Okay, so first off, let's sort out the Loud House timeline itself. There's a bit of confusion about how time works in the show, but I'll do my best to clear things up. Like many cartoons, there's sort of a floating timeline present throughout the entire series. Certain episodes exist in somewhat of a vacuum because their events are not important to the overarching story of the show, but at the same time, there's also a clear and definitively established timeline. But we know this because the Santiago family moves away in Season 2's episode, The Loudest Mission, Relative Chaos, and they are still away in Garage Band, a later episode in Season 2, but we've also seen the seasons change and have seen specific holidays throughout the show's 2 seasons. So at a surface level, this cartoon conspiracy is pretty much all but confirmed, but all signs point to the fact that this episode still exists in a vacuum of Lincoln's mind. At the end of the episode, Lincoln seems to snap out of this worst case scenario nightmare. Normally, it'd be easy to chalk this one up and call it a day, but there's a moment after Lincoln allegedly snaps out of it that changes everything. The moment I'm referring to is when we see Clyde and Lori riding a tandem bike together. Sure, you could postulate that it's just a coincidence, but here at ChannelFrederator, as you guys know, we leave no stone unturned, so we won't be scoring this cartoon conspiracy until we explore every possible scenario, and there's another major factor that we haven't even touched yet. Ooh, it's getting intense. And that factor is whether or not Lincoln Loud has certain time traveling and/or interdimensional abilities. Yeah, we're going all Rick and Morty with this one because as far as I can see, there are realistically only two possible explanations for how this conspiracy could possibly be debunked. First off, Lincoln is a time traveler. Yeah, I know it sounds absolutely ridiculous, but give it a chance. In setting of the events in the butterfly effect, the Loud House could now effectively be split into two separate timelines. One where Lincoln did the right thing and told the truth, and the other where he didn't tell the truth and hid it from his sister. For the sake of keeping track of things and making life easier, we'll refer to the timeline where he hid the truth from Lisa as the darkest timeline. Somewhere there exists a prime timeline where everyone is back to normal and living their happy lives, but because Lincoln chose to lie to his sister, his actions set the darkest timeline in motion. Let's think about it. In the episode, we see Bobby and Lori break up, right? And when Lincoln has allegedly snapped back to reality, Lori and Clyde are riding a tandem bicycle with a just married sign on the back. The bike in question belongs to Clyde's father's and was first seen in Hand Me Downer, so we know the bike is real, and on top of that, the butterfly effect is the first time we meet Flip, of Flip's Food and Fuel, and the female TV reporter. Both characters appear in Lincoln's supposed fantasy and would return in later episodes. Flip is in the episodes Four Bros About to Rock, Out on a Limo, and Intern for the Worst, and the news reporter is in the episodes Out on a Limo, The Loudest Yard, and Snowboard. It is certainly possible that in Lincoln's fantasy, he is pulling elements from real life that the audience simply hasn't seen yet. But it is also strange that a fantasy sequence would serve as the introduction to these characters. I mean, I can't be the only one that thinks that. So it would make sense to think every episode that follows takes place in this darkest timeline. Once he realizes that this new reality is the worst possible scenario, he travels back to the moment that set the timeline and chose to rectify it, thus putting the family back on the prime timeline. The second theory would be that Lincoln can travel interdimensionally. The theory of the multiverse speculates that there are an infinite number of universes that are parallel. So in theory, there's a universe where the Loud family are all dogs, and even another where Lincoln has 10 brothers instead of 10 sisters. Sound familiar? That would be because we caught a glimpse of this universe in episode 45 of season 1, One of the Boys. In case you haven't seen it, Lincoln imagines a life where he has brothers instead of sisters, and Lisa gives him a watch that can make portals to other worlds. Yeah, Lincoln isn't trying to get that Szechuan sauce, but it's entirely possible that Lincoln discovered an early prototype of this watch in Lisa's room next to the failed experiment, and when he sees the consequences of his lie, he chooses to hop into a new dimension. Based on the episodes that follow Butterfly Effect, we assume that Lincoln chose a universe where everything was almost exactly the same as the original Loud House universe, with the slight difference that Lincoln told Lisa the truth. But then the question arises of what happened to Lincoln in the prime dimension. The time traveling business doesn't really hold up too well in the long run because there are plenty of moments that we've seen where if, Lincoln could time travel, he probably would have. Take the Peanuts football gag in The Loudest Yard, for example. A time traveler doesn't simply fall for those kind of antics. There are a couple of big knocks on the whole interdimensional time traveling theory as well. We don't actually ever see Lincoln with the portal watch from One of the Boys, and the most obvious thing is that the fact that the portal watch is part of a dream episode. Kind of a bummer, but I guess I can live with it. The most likely scenario is that Lincoln just imagined all of it. As we all know, oftentimes when people get nervous, they tend to assume the worst case scenario, so Lincoln could have fabricated all of this in his mind based on his worst fears for his sister. His worst fear for Lori is that Bobby would secretly date Lenny. His worst fear for Lenny is that she will become a cold, calculating, distant genius, and so on and so forth for the rest of the other sisters. There are also a couple of major inconsistencies in Lincoln's fantasy which don't hold up under the microscope. First and foremost, while skydiving with Lori, we see Clyde use a flip phone, but in other episodes like Sound of Silence, Two Boys and a Baby, and Cover Girls, he has a smartphone. Next up, Lenny is driving a car and thus has a driver's license, which, let's be honest, is really never going to happen. If Lenny did somehow get her license, she would be able to drive in later episodes, but she never does. And then of course, there's the glaring issue that in the following episodes, every character has returned to normal. That final moment where we see Lori and Clyde was either Lincoln worrying again or nothing more than two friends riding a bike. So with all of that in mind, pun completely intended, I'd have to rate the conspiracy of Butterfly Effect existing as a standalone episode outside of the Loud House timeline 5 Lincoln Flies out of 5. This one is basically all but officially confirmed. Also, I suppose it's time to address the elephant in the room. The episode is called Butterfly Effect, so it's pretty obvious that the episode is just playing around with that chaos theory. But hey, you know, I had a lot of fun exploring the multiple possibilities, and I want to know, what do you think? Do you think Lincoln possesses interdimensional or time-traveling abilities? Or do you think, similarly to us, he's just got an overactive imagination? Be sure to let us know in the comment section down below, and while you're down there, let us know about any cartoon conspiracies that you want us to cover in a later episode. Don't forget to hit the little bell icon to be notified whenever we post a new video, and subscribe to ChannelFrederator as it's your cartoon central on the internet, and never forget, Frederator loves you.